Okay, this is your Algebra 1 Unit 2 review recording. So just again, this is not meant to be all-inclusive. You need to make sure you go back through your homework, your notes, and all the different types of problems. Also, make sure you look at the two standard checklists that we went through to kind of focus in on maybe the areas that you didn't do well on the quizzes, so that you can make sure to re-practice those. So we'll just kind of go through not every single question here, but at least one of each time. We'll do a lot of them just because I tried to pick only one or two of each type to begin with. So first question, which set of ordered pairs represents a function? So remember that you're not always going to be answering this with ordered pairs. You could be answering this with a graph. You could be answering this with a table. You could be answering this with a mapping where it's got like the two ovals with the arrows between. So the key is that when we are talking about a function, our definition is that each input has exactly one output. So when I look at this, input -1 has 4, input 2 has 4, input 8 has 4, input 10 has 4. Okay, this is a function because each x, each input, is assigned to exactly one y. Now I can check and see why the other ones were not good. If I look at B, you can see that the first and the third ordered pair both have the same input, but they have different outputs. So we would say that input 0 has two different outputs, and that's not okay. Same thing down here in C. The last two ordered pairs, input 3 is assigned to two different outputs. So that is why that one is not a function. All right, so talking about domain and range, we've done domain and range a lot. Remember that if you have just a finite list, meaning it's not a word problem, it's not something that can continue infinitely, that for finite lists, we can list domain and range in the little braces, you know, like 0, 2, 5, so on and so forth. But here, this is a real life situation, and it's talking about number of bagels for the input. So domain is the input values. So we're just thinking about what values make sense for number of bagels. So obviously you could purchase no bagels, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So that is why we say that for the domain, x has to be greater than or equal to 0 because you can't purchase a negative number of bagels, and you also have to say whole numbers because you cannot purchase a half of a bagel. For the range, they cost 50 cents each, and the range is the total cost. So you could be charged $0 if you don't buy any bagels, then 50 cents, then $1, then $1.50, then $2. So we would say y is also greater than or equal to 0. It's also whole, but it has to be a multiple of 50 cents. So there's that. All right, next one, evaluate for given values. I'm not going to go through all three of the values here. I'm just going to do the first one. But again, this is just plug it in and follow order of operations. The reason why I'm picking the first one is because it's a negative, and I want to remind you that when you are plugging in negative values, you need to put parentheses around them. Because if you don't, your calculator is going to think the wrong thing. If you type this into your calculator just like this, you're going to get the right answer because it's going to do order of operations, which says to do exponents first, so -2 squared is +4. Then multiplication, -3 times -2 is +6. And then we'll do the addition. 4 plus 6 is 10, plus 2 gives me 12. Now again, you also needed to do 3 1/2, but I'm not going to do that on the video because it's the same thing. Just plug it in and evaluate. So in activities 6 and 7, we spent a ton of time looking at all kinds of different graphs. Remember that some graphs are discrete, some graphs are continuous. This graph is continuous because the points are connected. I always have people who say it's not continuous because it has endpoints. That has nothing to do with the definition. The definition of continuous is whether or not the points are connected for this. So this one is the graph a function? Yes, it is. Why? Because it passes the vertical line test. I can draw as many vertical lines as I want. It's only going to touch the graph one spot. Which points correspond to absolute maximums? So again, remember your definitions. Absolute max is, first of all, if it asked you to list it, you would only list the y coordinate. Here, it's not saying which points are absolute maxes. It says which points correspond to. So be careful with your wording. If it had just asked you for the absolute max, you would only be listing the y coordinate. So the absolute max here, the biggest y value, that's the definition. The biggest y value that I see is 16. So on this graph, there's 2 different points associated with that, both B and C. Relative minimum, here it's asking for the actual relative minimum. So here I'm only listing the y coordinate. Remember that relative minimums are points where it's lower than either the left around it or the right around it or both. So it's like a valley, a low point, low-lying area. So that would be right here. I've got the bottom of a valley. This point right there is lower than everything around it. So the y value there is 0. Remember that relative do not include endpoints. So that's really, really important. You cannot say, oh, relative minimum here, that's lower. Can't include the endpoints. So this is our only relative min. What is the absolute min? The absolute minimum can include the endpoints, and the y value there is halfway between -8 and -12, so that's -10. Domain here, as opposed to what we had up here, where it was everything bigger than a certain value, here we've got what we called a sandwich, because the domain, x is allowed to be anything between -2.5 and 3. So since it was a real life situation and there's a decimal in the original problem, I can use a decimal here. But it's between -2.5 and 3. For the range, similar idea. I look up and down. The lowest point I see is -10, and y goes all the way from -10 up to +16. All right. There was a typo here. Half-life, remember, means that the amount that you had gets cut in half each time. So it's not a constant rate of change. You're taking the one before it and cutting that in half. So I started with 20. After 2 seconds, I'm going to have 10. Always double check the x values because the half-life is 2 seconds. If this had jumped all the way from 2 to 6, you would need to be careful. I always get people who just try to play on the pattern, which is good unless they change the x values. So those should be your values there, just cutting in half each time. Translations here. So when you are doing these, remember that when you have inside the parentheses or absolute value bars, if it's that type of function, those are horizontal shifts. Positive means it's a left shift. Negative means it's a right shift on the inside. If it's outside the parentheses or absolute value bars, And if there aren't any parentheses or absolute value bars, then that definitely means it's outside. Those are your vertical shifts. And positive is up, negative is down. So here, when I look at this equation, here's my parent, just plain old x squared. Now I'm changing that to this guy. Inside the parentheses, I have a minus 3, so that means I need to go right 3. Outside the parentheses, I have a negative 2, so that means down 2. So I move everything about this graph right 3 units and down 2 units. So I moved my vertex first. Now I'm going to move this point. So I start on the original. I go right 3 and down 2. Same with this point. Right 3, down 2, and so on and so forth. So then you can graph it. You can do more points if you want. So same thing here. You look at this. This one's a cubic. It doesn't matter. Just inside, outside is all I need to know. So positive on the inside means left. So that's a horizontal shift. Don't forget to name the transformation. Left 1, and then also a vertical shift up 12. This one should be very obvious. Remember that Y's always go in the top and Y's are rise. Y's are vertical. So A, C, D, E, those are all equivalent to each other. B is the only one that's not. Remember that if it said delta Y over delta X, that would be correct. But delta X over delta Y is not correct. Finding slope, you have to be able to do it all 3 ways. I am just going to do 2 of the 3 because the table and ordered pairs are the same, because all this is a list of ordered pairs. So if I want, I can write them separately. Now most people don't. Most people just look at them that way. But if it helps you to write them separately, then do that. So remember, x1, y1 is the first point, x2, y2 is the second. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So negative 1 plus 13 gives me 12. 0 minus negative, which becomes plus also, gives me 3. 12 over 3 gives me a slope of 4. From a graph, remember when you have a graph, there should always be 2 exact points marked. You can see the little dots right here and right there on your paper. So then you can draw your little slope triangle. So rise here is 3, the run 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember that because it falls, that it's negative. So negative rise over run in this case. Remember that you could also draw your triangle this way. Doesn't matter which way you draw it. All right, this one, when you write your function, first of all, it tells you what to name it, so pay attention to that. But the phone is a flat cost. Monthly rate, this keyword tells you that needs to be the coefficient of your x. So 75x plus 250. So it tells you the monthly rate. So the rate of change, or the slope, is 75. With units, we would say $75 per month. Now, because it didn't say with units, I would accept just 75 here. But remember, you could also ask this question, what is the slope? Reasonable domain, again, domain is x values. So x stands for number of months. So that's something where we would, if you're paying, that is going to have to be bigger than 0. Also, the number of months that you purchase a plan is going to be a whole number. So also whole numbers there. All right, moving on to lesson 10. Direct and indirect variation. It does you no good if you do not know the formulas. Direct variation is y equals k times x, where k is the constant of variation. So, oops, moved that around a little accidentally. So, they told us the constant of variation is 6, so that means my equation is y equals 6x. So now, no matter what value of x or y they give me, I can find the other one. So in this case, they told me y was 54, find x. So this is my equation, very simple to solve, divide both sides by 6, and x is 9. The next one is the exact same, except varies indirectly. Maybe I should use a different color here. Varies indirectly. That formula is y equals k divided by x. So again, if the constant of variation is 5, that means y equals 5 over x. Now that I have the equation, I can plug in whatever they give me and solve for the other. So they said y is 10. So 10 equals 5 divided by x. If I want to get x alone, I'm going to multiply both sides by x. That'll cancel this. So x times 10 is 10x equals 5. So then get x alone by dividing by 10. 5 divided by 10 is 1/2. All right, next one, sequences. So again, I'm not going to do all of these because they all have to do with sequences. I'm going to do the last one because it requires you to do all the parts. Now, there was a typo on this that I didn't notice. This 19 is supposed to be a 17. Many of you may not have noticed either because it told you it was arithmetic, and so you really only needed the first 2 terms. So apologize about the typo. But here, write a function to describe the arithmetic sequence. Whenever it asks you to write an explicit formula or a function, that is this formula that we spent at least 6 days on. So make sure that you know this, just like you need to know these guys up here. Those will not be given to you. So in order to write the function, I need to know the first term, that's a sub 1, and the common difference. So the first term, that's pretty easy. I can see that that's -3. Then n is my variable, so this stays n minus 1. D is my common difference, so I look, 2 minus -3 is 5. 7 minus 2 is 5. So I've confirmed, and again, you could keep going, which again is how I did end up noticing the typo eventually, but we see that our common difference is 5. When it asks you to write a function or an explicit formula, it needs to be simplified. So you have to distribute your common difference, so -3 plus 5n, 5 times n, and then 5 times -1 is -5. So then, because it says function, we write f of n. We've got 5n is its only term, and then the constants would give me -8. So f of n equals 5n minus 8. All right. Equations of lines. So, remember, it does not matter what form it asks for your answer in. You need to start your work based on what you are given. So, if you are given the slope and the intercept, then you need to first write it in slope-intercept form. If you can find the slope and a point, then you have to start with point-slope form. So you don't get to choose, and you're not going to be able to go directly to the form that it asks for. So again, I'm not going to do all of these. I'm just going to pick a couple. So I'm going to pick this one to start, write an equation in standard form that has m equals 10 and b equals 6. Well, I can't write standard form right away because I know m and b, which means I need to use slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. This is an equation of the line. It's just not in standard form. So once I have the equation of the line, then it's on you to transfer it over, to change it, convert it to standard form. So standard form is ax plus by equals c. Remember that a has to be positive, and a, b, and c all have to be integers, meaning no fractions or decimals. So I'm going to subtract the 10x because in standard form, x is first, then y's, then the equal sign, and then the constant. So these cancel. I've got negative 10x plus y equals 6. This is still not in standard form because my a is not positive. So I have to change all my signs. You can't just change one, change them all. So positive 10x, negative y equals negative 6. So this is my standard form answer. All right, I'm going to do this one next because that's going to cover point slope and a real life situation. So this in the original information says average speed of 3.5 miles per hour. Keywords, that tells you that this guy is your slope. Then it says after 5 hours of canoeing, Jeff has traveled 18 miles. That's giving you an ordered pair. That's giving you an x that goes with a y. So this is my x1 and this is my y1. So what did this information give me? This information gave me a point and a slope. So that means the equation form that it makes the most sense to use is point-slope form. So luckily that's what it asks for in A. But if it had just said, write the equation in standard form, that wouldn't change how we proceed. We would still have to start with point-slope form because that's what I'm given. So y minus y1, which was 18, equals m, which is 3.5, times x minus x1. So this is my answer for A. Now, if you want to see how you convert from point slope to standard form, you actually go through slope-intercept form along the way. So if you have a point and a slope and you need it in slope-intercept, all you have to do is distribute the slope first. So that'll give me 3.5x and then minus 17.5. So distribute the slope first when you're converting from point slope form, and then move over your y1 with its like term. So those cancel. So now, if it had asked for slope-intercept form, I would be done. But it didn't. It asked for standard form. Remember, in standard form, first of all, I have to have my x's on the left side, and they're not. So I'm going to move my x term first by subtracting it on both sides. So I'm going to move my work this way. So negative 3.5x plus y equals 0.5. Then I know that A has to be positive, so that means I'm going to change all the signs. Then I know A, B, and C have to be integers. These are halves. So those are decimals, which could also be fractions. The denominator would be 2, so that's what I multiply by. That's going to give me 7x minus 2y equals negative 1. And this now is in standard form. So remember that these, the slope-intercept, slope, point-slope, standard, that those formulas are up on the board for you. All right, remember from a graph, no matter what form it wants, you can identify your y-intercept. That's the y-coordinate of the y-intercept is your b, so b is 3. And then slope you can get by counting rise and run. So I used this point, I think. And so that was up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And my run was 3. Pen not working real well. So my rise was 6, my run was 3, which means my slope is 2. It is positive because it rises. So y equals 2x plus 3. All right, parallel and perpendicular. Remember, the only reason you have given these lines is to tell you the slope of your line. So parallel lines have the same slope. Perpendicular lines, their slopes are opposite reciprocals. So I'm just going to do this one, not this one. But the slope is 6 of this line. My line has a slope that's the opposite reciprocal of that, which is negative 1/6. Once I have the slope, I am done with this line. I'm never going to look at it again because my line goes through this point, which means I have to write it in point slope form because that's all I have, the slope and a point. I know it says slope intercept form, but that's not what I'm given, so I need to start with what I'm given. So y minus y1, minus negatives become pluses, equals m, parentheses, x, minus negative becomes a plus. This is point slope form. Since I need it in slope intercept, again, all that means is I need to distribute my slope. That's negative 4, 6, which is negative 2/3. And then move my y1. These are both negative, so negative 3 and 2/3 as an improper fraction is negative 11/3. So then this would be my final answer. All right, last one. On here, I am not going to go through all the calculator steps again. You have the printed out directions for those, but I will just kind of talk through the main points. Years since purchase, you enter these numbers in L1. You enter these numbers in L2. Make sure your stat plot is turned on. Make sure you clear your lists first. To get the equation for the line of best fit, you go to stat. And then you scroll right to the calc menu. And then you choose choice 4, which is lin reg. Once you do that, do not forget to paste the equation into your y1. And remember, you do that by pressing vars, scrolling right to y vars. Then you're going to choose choice 1 for function, and then choose y1. Make sure that when you do your scatter plot that you don't forget to adjust the window so you can see it. So when you do that, you should get the answer that I read in class, which I guess no harm in writing the answer here, is y equals 18.5x plus 622.5. Then B, again, I'm not going to show it again, but I will quickly go through what buttons you're supposed to press. This, once you've got it graphed, you hit second trace. Then choice 1, which is value. And then you just type in 50, because that's what they gave you, and hit enter. And then it should give you the answer, which is 1,547.5. All right. And so correlations, because the slope of the linear trend is positive, this is strong positive. This is strong negative. This one is a positive trend, but the points would be kind of far from the line of best fit. So this we would call weak positive. And this one we would call no correlation. There is no obvious relationship between X and Y there. All right, please, please, please make sure you know the formulas. Make sure you know what buttons to press. Make sure you know all the things that I wrote down here. Same slope, opposite reciprocals. Up here, again, these formulas. So go through, review, study, practice problems, go through your checklist, and make sure that you are prepared.